Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Duke It Out Wrestling Podcast, where I, Duke, talk about the events from the past, present, or future that happen in the world of professional wrestling. Now, for this podcast, this is the first ever one I've ever recorded on video as well, so that one's pretty exciting, but I'm going to be talking about the whole all-out week that I was able to go to. It was such a blast, and while there was the unfortunate circumstance that I did buy 2 tickets and no one else ended up being able to take the second one, but I was still able to have a good time, meet up with some friends of mine while I was there as well, and be able to meet other wrestling fans, and luckily at the Fan Fest, some of AEW's best wrestlers. So I'm just going to be talking about my whole experience and just some of its highlights, and hopefully you'll enjoy the entire listen. And I drove down there on Wednesday morning for the Dynamite taping, and I was very excited for that one going in, mainly because I knew we were going to get Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks versus Will Ospreay and Aussie Open, and I was very excited to see that match, and rightfully so, because the match was freaking incredible, but I'll get into that a little bit later. But I was able to get settled in at the hotel and only had like a free hour, I'd say, before I was able to really start walking over to the arena, because luckily I was able to stay at the Holiday Inn across the street from the Now Arena, so I was able to walk there for every show, which was a huge relief since I didn't have to pay for parking. But the Dynamite taping was a great show. Jon Moxley's opening promo, leaving out the World Championship contract, was great, and playing with the bit of heat that he had from the Chicago crowd, even though more people were cheering him than they usually would for a rival of CM Punk's. But then it brought out to the great promo that Punk had later on in the night with Ace Steel trying to motivate him to have this world title match with Moxley. And that was a great moment until everything at the media scrum happened, and then it was all kind of a bummer after that. But I'm not going to discuss that yet. Like, that, I was more figuring that out as I was going to bed, and finding out more information when I was packing and leaving. So that wasn't as much of the highlight of my weekend. I'm trying to think about the positives. But the match with Bryan Danielson and Jake Hager on Dynamite was really good. The women's tag team match was actually a really, really good women's match for Dynamite. One of their better ones in recent weeks. Could be biased because I was there live, but that combo move that when Toni Storm jumped out and did the tornado DDT, I think, on the floor, that was freaking incredible. And the Fatal 4-Way match with Dante Martin, Rey Fenix, Roosh, and and Wheeler Yuta, the winner of the match. I thought that was a really, really fun Fatal 4-Way with some very cool spots in there, obviously with the competitors, and to promote the Casino Ladder match. So that was a really good time. But the main event of Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks versus Will Ospreay and Aussie Open was such an incredible match. Kenny Omega doing that whole egotistical thing with Justin Roberts on how he's done so much more and is better looking and has a better smile than Will Ospreay. I thought that was hilarious. And the face-offs with Kenny Omega and Will Ospreay were absolutely incredible. Their back and forth work was very slick, and it was more so in a style of they were having some great moments, but they weren't giving away everything, knowing that a future match between the two could more than likely happen. And especially with the match being incredible, so many highlighted spots I could think of, with Will Ospreay doing the shooting star into the tombstone. That was incredible. And all the near falls were insanely nail biting. And of course, every single super kick from the Young Bucks was great. And Nick Jackson's moving around hot tag was way more entertaining than most of his matches in the past few weeks. But after Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks got the win, this happened after Dynamite was off the air, I believe. Will Ospreay and Aussie Open just continued to attack Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks, exposing where Kenny Omega was hurt because he had a band around his shoulder and had a band around his gut. But didn't have any of that for All Out, so I think that was more for kayfabe sense. But that was a very, very fun Dynamite, because I went to the Dynamite before All Out last year, and both of them were almost equally as fun. I think last year's had a little bit of better matches, since there was FTR versus Santana and Ortiz that year. But this was a very fun episode of Dynamite that got great build-up for All Out. And I was wondering if they were going to bring out MJF during the Dynamite, or if they were waiting for All Out, which obviously they waited for All Out. But it was a very fun time. Thursday was the only one. It was honestly the only day where there was nothing planned for like wrestling wise. There was I was invited to a AEW show in Chicago, but All Out was in Hoffman Estates, Illinois, and it would be like a 1 hour drive to get to Chicago. And since I was by myself, I didn't want to be around. I didn't want to find a place to park and walk around Chicago by myself. So I stayed in and did some more sightseeing around other cities in Illinois. I can't remember the exact ones. There was a statue park, and that was really cool to see. But yeah, Thursday was more just like the calm and lay back, and also just be bummed out that I was in a hotel room by myself for a good chunk of the day. But Friday was then the Rampage taping, which I'll be honest, definitely the Rampage taping was definitely the weakest thing out of anything show-wise. And I should mention the dark matches that did happen on Dynamite and Rampage, which was kind of funny because there was this one jobber / indie tag team that faced Keith Lee and Swerve Strickland one night on Dark for Dynamite, and then one of the first matches they were facing another team. And I think was it Dark Order? It might have been Dark Order. But it was funny, that was just like a repeat of that. And then after that, Serena Deeb had a match when she had a match on Dark, that other Dynamite taping. So I thought that was interesting. And also they had another match with Hangman Page and the Dark Order teaming up for a trios match. So I thought that was very entertaining. And I'll just get on to the Rampage taping because it's hard to process immediately what all the dark matches that happened. Sky Blue got a couple good matches, which was great because she's from Chicago, so she got a great pop there. And Rampage kicked off with the Trios Championship semifinals of Hangman Page and the Dark Order against Orange Cassidy and Best Friends. And while I think the result of most fans knowing that Hangman Page and Dark Order were going to win, since Hangman Page and Dark Order facing the Elite, that's obvious booking right there. But this still was a very fun and intense match. They got some very good spots in with Orange Cassidy, Chuck Taylor, Trent Beretta. John Silver got an awesome hot tag sequence in there. And I believe it was John Silver who was able to get the pin. I can't remember on which one. I don't think it was Orange Cassidy. It was either Chuck Taylor or Trent Beretta. But I love that John Silver was able to get the pin here and not Hangman Page. So it didn't fully hype up the fact that, it's Hangman that's highlighting this team. No, John Silver is one of AEW's most underrated in-ring competitors. So I loved that he got to get a pinfall victory for this match. And then there was the mixed tag team match with Sammy Guevara and Ty Mello against Ortiz and Ruby Soho. I had mentioned in my review of All Out that I don't know if I've posted this before or after my All Out ranking, but I think this match on Rampage was a lot better. Ruby Soho getting the roll-up pin on Ty Mello was a very cool moment. And Sammy Guevara and Ortiz, I was shocked that they had good chemistry, but I'm like, yeah, they've been in a stable together since the beginning of AEW, so what the hell was I thinking? But I thought this match was definitely better than the one that they had at the All Out 0 Hour, mainly because, since Ruby Soho and Ortiz won that match on Rampage, we kind of expected going in that Sammy and Ty Mello were going to win at All Out. And plus, since they put their titles on the line for that match. But still, then we had some fun segments and this one was on Dynamite, but I remember the interview with Christian and Jack Perry and Jungle Boy saying, you're not going to be facing Jungle Boy, you're going to be facing Jack Perry. I thought that was a great touch. And the backstage segment with Jade Cargill and Athena was very, very fun build-up. And I know I'm positive there was one more match, but I was trying to think of exactly what it was. But I'll just get to the main event because I'll be honest, it was one of the weaker Rampage main events that I have seen. It was Ricky Starks versus QT Marshall. Now this match did have plenty of purpose because Ricky Starks needed a lot of hype to go into his match with Powerhouse Hobbs at All Out, and especially since he lost, it's good that he's got this win under his belt against QT Marshall. And while I don't think QT Marshall is the most enticing main event opponent, I think this was a decent enough match, but I think the opening match and main event match should have been switched over, but maybe they wanted to have the trios match first to make sure they had enough time for it, or to make sure that the fans would watch it in time. I don't really know, but it was a pretty decent episode of Rampage. Nothing really extreme happening, but they did get a face-off of Ricky Starks and Powerhouse Hobbs after, and Chris Jericho and Bryan Danielson. So that was pretty fun. But what I'm mainly excited to be talking about for this podcast is the AEW All Out Fan Fest weekend. I had an absolute blast at this event. This was the first ever Fan Fest anything I've been able to do with any type of wrestling event. I've never been to an event like this for WWE or AEW, so this was such an amazing environment to be around. Getting to see all the cool displays for AEW's newest action figures, some of their previous bestsellers, and some that they haven't even released yet or are just going to be released. And they were going to be doing some Upper Deck thing, but that apparently never happened. The All Out panel was incredible the whole time, when it was Vicky Guerrero, Aubrey Edwards, Amanda Huber, and why am I blanking on this right now? Because I always think of her name as Blue Pants, but Leva Bates. They did a promotion for AEW Heels, and there was a Busted Open session that Mark Henry just kept saying, "Busted Open," to the mic a bunch of different times, and it was insanely hilarious. And there were interviews with wrestlers like Ricky Starks, Claudio Castagnoli, Wardlow, Bryan Danielson. It was such an amazing time up there. And then I was able to go to quite a few meet and greets, and I had such a blast doing all of those. I definitely was a little bit nervous doing those because I'm always nervous meeting famous people because I'm a dumbass like that. But they were all incredibly nice. The first ones I met up during the day were Swerve and Keith Lee, the AEW World Tag Team Champions, and they were so nice. And they were the first ones of the day, so it was still early in the morning. They had great energy. Swerve was hilarious. Keith had great charisma, and I was able to sing the "Oh my God" at Keith Lee, and that was so much fun. And I was able to take a picture with them, get an autograph, which theirs is over there, and I had a blast meeting them. And the next that I was going to meet in line, I then bought for Bryan Danielson, but Ricky Starks was standing out there just for people to stand out in a line and get a picture with him for free. You didn't have to pay for it. And the Dark Order was also out there, but I didn't have time to get a picture with them because I had to get my Bryan Danielson line. But Ricky Starks was so incredibly nice. Like, I know he had just turned babyface, so of course he's got to be nicer to the fans, but I was just more surprised on how humble and down to earth he was, and just taking his time with everybody that was there and wanting to meet him. He was just one of the nicest people out of the bunch that I had met. And then I got to meet Bryan Danielson. I have met Bryan Danielson previously. This was my third time meeting him. I met him at a WWE backstage thing, and he was at an autograph signing at a Motorola, I think it's called. I might have pronounced it wrong. But he was just as nice as he was every other time I met him. And it was funny because on the picture that he signed, he was apparently originally starting to write Brian and then threw it away. But I'm like, no, that's a treasure. But it was also really cool to meet him. And another one that was standing out to meet just for free in line was both Jay Lethal and Satnam Singh. And they were both extremely nice. I was so happy to meet such a wrestling legend like Jay Lethal. And when I shook Satnam Singh's hand, holy fuck, dude, his hand is huge. I knew that because I've been watching him on TV and I saw clips of what he did in the NBA, but God, his hand was huge. Like, yeah, you could literally end my life with that hand. Like, holy crap. But that was really fun. And after the Bryan Danielson meet, there was a couple more shorter lines, so I was able to get in the line for Wheeler Yuta and was able to take a picture with him holding the Ring of Honor Pure Championship, and that was awesome. That was an awesome picture, and I got to shout him out just for how amazing he's been doing in the ring in AEW lately, and just how exciting it is to see his career take off. And then I got to meet Athena/Ember Moon, and she was so incredibly nice. She was talking about video games with a bunch of different people in the line, even to all of us while we were waiting, mentioning games like Zelda, Elden Ring. It was such a great experience, and she was so nice too. And I actually had to go back to Athena's table because I accidentally left my envelope that had my tickets for other meet and greets later in the day. So she was like, "Oh, thank God you're able to get that, right?" And I'm like, "Yeah, thank God." And if you can't see from some of these, I go by Duke on the Duke It Out podcast, obviously, but my real name is actually Lucas. So on some of them, I had them write down Duke, and some of them Lucas. It was just more so whenever they asked what my name was, sometimes I would say both Lucas, but my friends call me Duke, or just Lucas, or just Duke. So for Hangman Page, which was, I believe, it was after the Athena meet and greet, Hangman Page was probably the nicest that I did meet out of anyone, at least for that day, just because he was so humble and down to earth. And his line was extremely long, but you had to wait longer, just more so because he was taking his time with everyone that wanted to meet him, much more than everyone else did. And while if you're not, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just a very humble thing that he was doing, and I really appreciated him doing that to all those fans. And it was great to talk with him. He was the only wrestler out of all of them that I mentioned Duke It Out podcast with, just because he was the one I carried the conversation with the longest for sure. And he was the one that was more so asking what the fans were up to instead of the fans praising the wrestler. So he was a very, very nice guy. And then after the Hangman Page meet and greet, yeah, there are only two more left after that. The next was the Bastard Pack, and that was so great to meet him. He was like he kept being in the mix of like in character, but still trying to not be an actual bastard. So it was very, very cool. And I got to take a picture with him, and the way I stood behind him, I kind of looked like his heater, and I loved that for our picture, especially since he has the All Atlantic Championship around his shoulder. And then I also got to meet Orange Cassidy, and that was an absolute blast. Like I mentioned with Pac, how he managed to stay in character and not be like an actual bastard. Orange Cassidy was able to stay in character but still act like he cared like about the fans. It was so cool. And speaking of cool, if you can see from the action figure that he signed back there, he just wrote Lucas and then cool, which was very fun. And I think the picture that I took with him might just be my favorite that I took with anybody out of there, just because it's by far the most entertaining and funny out of all of them. So that was just an absolute blast. And the last that I got to meet for the day was Eddie Kingston. And I'll be honest, if there was anyone that I was actually nervous if like I wasn't going to get a great experience with, it was Eddie Kingston, just because of how fresh off of his suspension, he's got a lot of heat going on, but he was super down to earth and so nice. And when I asked him to personalize mine, he acknowledged that he was just glad that I wasn't going to try and sell it on eBay or nothing. But I'm like, no, this is Eddie Kingston's autograph. This is a national treasure that I'm making sure is for myself. And if you can't see up there, he was able to write the 2 Duke on there as well. And I just had a very good time at the Fan Fest. It was something that was definitely needed. Definitely hasn't been the greatest of summers for me. So having it end off on that for a Labor Day weekend was something very needed, and getting to meet some of my all-time favorite wrestlers / heroes. It was an amazing experience. And then I was already so drained after coming home from the Fan Fest that I had to wake up for All Out's pre-party that Danhausen was hosting across the street from the Now Arena. And they just had some like fun fan events. You were able to potentially dunk QT Marshall in a dunk tank, which I paid $5 to do, and it was so much fun. And there was a Hungry Hungry Hippos tournament, which I didn't participate in, but I watched it, and Aubrey Edwards was reffing it, and that was very entertaining. And Danhausen was able to hit Smart Mark Sterling in the nuts, I think, 3 times throughout that entire pre-show event. So that was very entertaining as well. And Max Caster did a rap show. It was such a blast. And then I walked into All Out with a few drinks already in my system. So I had a very, very fun time with the show. I won't go into too much detail since I just talked about the ranking of the whole All Out card for one of my other videos, and I've either posted it before or after the podcast. I'm not sure what my schedule is going to be editing and releasing these videos as of now, but All Out was such an amazing show. It definitely could have been a little bit better. The stat card definitely did affect some matches, and I definitely think All Out last year was a lot better just because of the fact that we got those amazing debuts of Ruby Soho and Bryan Danielson and Adam Cole, and the 5-star cage match with Young Bucks and the Lucha Brothers, which we did get another tag team classic here with the Acclaimed and Swerve in Our Glory, and the Trios Championship Finals was also incredible. Definitely my favorite 2 matches of the night. Those were the definite 2 top tier matches of that show for me, along with Eddie Kingston and Tomohiro Ishii. That was a brutal match, and I loved every second of it. But it was a very fun weekend. While I was by myself, I was able to interact with all the wrestling fans that were around the areas I was sitting at, and they were all super nice people, and I had a great time watching the show with all of them. And it was just a very, very fun weekend to just be a wrestling fan, let out all your adrenaline and have fun watching a bunch of pro wrestling and meeting a bunch of pro wrestlers and seeing all these exclusive fan fest stuff and seeing other awesome wrestling journalists like Will Washington from Fightful was there. And I keep forgetting her name, but the little Bailey fan, she was interviewing people around there as well, and RJ City. So it was just a great experience all around. I wanted to make sure to be able to talk about it a little bit in the podcast because I had such an amazing time. But that was this latest episode of the Duke It Out Wrestling Podcast. Thank you so much for watching. Please make sure to like this podcast, subscribe to the channel, ring the bell for notifications, and duke out your opinions below in the comments.